Hello every folks, and welcome to a bit of a test results kind of situation. So basically there were several videos, or not even videos, but theories and comments and things that ended up coming in terms of wanting to test various different mechanics and find out whether or not they were, functioning in this, that way or the other. Now, I ran a bunch of these tests, but only now realized that apparently I had the mic muted for a lot of this stuff. So let's go ahead and run over these numbers real quick, just to kind of show what was going on. So first of all, I was testing parry odds and whether or not things like rain and dodge had any effect, as well as whether or not sidestep had any effect there as well. Basically, what I found out over the course of all this testing was that well, there was no interaction between parry and dodge and sidestep. However, parry does seem to have basically just been given the deflect property rather than having them have different rules. So for those that don't know what I'm talking about, back in the PSP version, parry and deflect had different rules. This is one of the reasons that deflect oftentimes would end up not getting leveled up at all, whereas something like parry regularly would at least get a few ranks under its belt by the end of the game. Basically, it was the order in which they triggered that actually had any type of lasting effect there. Now, in this particular case, the way that I was testing it is if you're in the Karitanai map, so if you're training over here, you can basically cause yourself to be attacked only by certain types of units. So if you, for example, stay on this entire side of the river, they will never ever approach you for any reason. If at the same, like think about it as they're just observing from the castle and they don't exactly want to get involved. So if you ever want to test 2 units or whatever else, you just directly come here and that's the end of that. Anyway, so the way that I was testing it is that I had a couple of units kind of go into this under different circumstances, but I had them test in the rain, I had them test with dodge, sidestep, luck gear, without luck gear, all of that kind of thing. If you're staying in this rough area, I don't know why I'm exactly using the Joy-Con when I can just use the mouse for this, but basically if you're staying over here, you can guarantee that it'll only be this archer firing at you. And at the same time, if you were to, for example, put yourself right here, you can guarantee that it's pretty much just going to be these melee guys attacking you in a circle. If you want to test any magic stuff, you go up here, but this map is probably the best for testing in my opinion. Anyway, back to the actual test results here. So first of all, as far as a default count, I tested every interaction 50 different times in order to kind of hopefully get some idea of the different interactions involved and hopefully get an idea of what exactly is affecting what. So, for example, default parry odds with a rank 1 parry weapon were 6 parries out of 50 attacks, whereas a rank 3 was 11 parries out of 50 attacks. Now, I tested this through, again, different combinations of different things, but generally what I found was that luck this time around appears to be separate from, like, crit luck. Now, please, again, bear in mind, like every other time that this has come up, we're looking at a case where hopefully the data miners and stuff will be able to confirm all of these things one way or another. I'm just sharing the results of what I found and, saying accordingly. So, as far as parry odds went, I tested a guy that had no luck whatsoever, as well as the currently maximum luck gear that I have available on Mr. Voltaire over here, in a situation where, as before, he has the all you touch will turn to gold rating. And I didn't notice any difference in terms of parry odds. Both of them were roughly around 10 out of 50. So this is telling me that, roughly speaking, the maximum parry odds at rank 3 are going to be about 20%. At the same time, I've noticed that when he was parrying, like for example, if you have 2 different weapons, like let's say you put a counter weapon in your main hand and you put a parry weapon in your offhand, it will use that offhand weapon to parry. However, if you use a block, it will use the basic weapon. It'll use the first thing that's available. So in this particular case, that basically tells me that in terms of the parry, it's more than likely using the highest rank that's available under all circumstances. Basically telling me that the odds, more or less, in theory, again, this is until somebody finds the actual numbers, for rank 3 would be about 20%, for rank 2 would be about 15%, and the base rank would be about 10%. This has been pretty consistent, however many times I tried it. So this basically seems like the original parry plus 1 rank, more or less. Now, additionally, in terms of rain and dodge affecting parry rates, it didn't seem to have any noticeable effect. However, obviously their actual dodge rates are significantly higher, meaning that if you are looking for a situation where you want to make a unit fully able to dodge things, generally speaking, something like a Jewel of the Avatar and a Bugle, as well as potentially parking them near water tiles, is actually going to be a fairly safe way for you to have very high dodge odds. We're talking about like 50% hit chance, things like that. So the way that I think they kind of went about it with the accuracy thing, just to kind of throw this out there as a theory, this is less a... I know there will immediately be a comment somewhere of like, oh, it's justification for blah 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 blah. There's always something like that. But the way that I see it, every time that they've redone this game, they've kind of done this whole thing of like, what would the population have learned from the last time? Like, for example, in the SNES version, they probably would have noticed the fact that they were getting completely destroyed by finishers in a lot of cases, and suddenly everyone has finishers. They probably would have noticed that just having, you know, a slight bonus in certain circumstances maybe isn't necessarily doing the job, and so suddenly people had skill ranks and stuff like that. This time around, it's almost like the lesson learned by the population, and I really hope at some point that somebody mentions this in an interview or something, because honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if this was on a design document somewhere, but like, it feels like this time around they're like, well, what if we actually trained our soldiers up to max and gave them all of their accuracy stuff as just a default? Because realistically, in most cases, if anybody ever fell behind in the PSP version, you probably were giving them True Strike. So either way, that's my theory on this. Either way, so what I wanted to test with a lot of this stuff was whether or not skills like Sidestep actually affected parry rates, because it suddenly would give them, you know, a secondary utility. It would give you a reason to use them under more circumstances. As it currently stands, something like, I mean, Dodge and Sidestep are honestly fine. Like, in situations where you need to avoid those particular things, they are actually reasonably effective, especially with high luck. So one interaction that's very true is that luck is very, very, very much going to be affecting you in situations where you have any chance to dodge whatsoever. In fact, I would almost argue that Lucky Star is potentially completely busted in situations where you have an avoidance build. Because potentially dodge plus Lucky Star could see you dodging an absolute ridiculous amount of things. Because when I was going and testing somebody like Mr. Voltaire here, and I gave him an avatar stone there, he was more or less able to effectively dodge things in the 80 to 90 percentile, give or take, kind of range. I would say a solid 40 to 50% of the time. So it was a lot more reasonable than you'd expect of those particular numbers. That being said, when I was testing luck for parry purposes, it does not appear to have an interaction this time. I already mentioned that part. In terms of True Strike and Spell Strike, though, there was a theory that True Strike and Spell Strike are affecting your hit odds. That is to say, your secondary hit odds, so like stuff like your light averses or things like that. And this one was actually a little bit shocking, because I would say it's probably going into the inconclusive category. What it seemed to be doing, I might be wrong on this, but I have no way of directly confirming it aside from running this test hundreds more times or waiting for somebody to just data mine the dang thing. But True Strike seemed to have no effect in this particular case. However, Spell Strike did actually seem to hit more. Now, this is kind of where things get a little bit fudgy, because when I was going and testing the kind of baseline for True Strike, here's the reason that I think it's potentially doing it, okay? It seemed like it got unusually lucky the first time around when I was doing True Strike, because it got several back-to-back-to-back-to-back. It's possible that it was kind of an error in terms of how things were going. Maybe they added a biorhythm system secretly in the background. Honestly, I wouldn't put it past them. But it seemed like it was, generally speaking, fairly low odds. I was testing this with 2 daggers, a silencing dagger, and a stunning dagger. And I was basically testing them just on the same guy over and over and over and over and over. And there were kind of like runs of it hitting and runs of it not hitting, but it didn't seem terribly consistent. I put True Strike on there, and it was 5 out of 50. That first very lucky time, it got up to 15 out of 50, but on average, it was like 5 to 6 out of 50. But with Spell Strike, it was going up to 15 out of 50 of various activations. Yes, I'm aware that there's some errors in terms of, you know, the validity of the test and all that kind of thing, because they're technically two different weapons, but they've always had a very similar hit rate. So I figured, screw it, I might as well test if it was maybe affecting one or the other. More, you know, who knows? Who knows? There could be any number of interactions. But yeah, so the Spell Strike thing, I want to say it's like soft confirmed, because I was regularly seeing it seemingly improving the odds, but not guaranteeing anything. And it might potentially explain why you see things like concentration showing up on something like a Valkyrie, who, typically speaking, would not need any kind of accuracy as far as spells and stuff go, unless they're vastly out-leveled. So either way, I'm gonna say that's a maybe. So if anybody happens to be digging around and happens to find that debuff and maybe can find some list of interactions or something, I would be very fascinated to find out what's going on there. Additionally, does level seem to make a difference in terms of luck? I don't believe so. Luck just seems to be a flat value. Additionally, I think I already confirmed this earlier, but it seems to constantly use whichever rank of parry is higher, rather than checking them individually. It seems to consistently just rank at the same, like if I put parry 2 and parry 3 on there, it seems to consistently go at about the same rate as parry 3 rather than parry 2. It doesn't seem to increase it any to have two different parry weapons. But again, this is just basic observations here. What else did we find out over the course of this test? This guy looks like a total dork. Oh, Fear. Okay, so I was theorizing that Fear was potentially messing with activation chance. So this was actually kind of an error on my part. Basically, whenever I was going through Coda 4, there were multiple cases where, and yes, I know you're already typing out the comments. Don't worry, it's exactly what you think it is. But there were multiple cases where I would come back after, you know, waiting for the bajillion Dark Knight turns to happen, and Phalanx was gone, and, you know, Denim was completely just fully pulverized. And so, at any rate, what I did for this test was I put 4 different resonances on there. Those are confirmed to have a 40% activation chance. I took two skill cards to guarantee it at exactly 100% activation chance, and then proceeded to test it to test it with Fear, and it constantly ended up activating 100% of the time. So I can confirm that that was an error on my part. Now, the reason for this is specifically because originally I ran into it in Coda 4. The same guy that runs Lament of the Dead also runs Intimidate, so that's really all that was happening there. It was just Intimidate doing its thing. It's one of the few cases where Intimidate actually gets a chance to fully function. Anyway, next order of business was whether or not Curse actually has a chance to block crits. So this is one that I've seen allegedly confirmed multiple times. I'm actually showing it with her because I tested it 2 different ways. I tested it using a guaranteed crit move as well as 4 crit cards to see if it just reduced the rate, or, you know, didn't do anything with the rate, or what have you. So actually 3 separate things were confirmed. So for one thing, as far as Curse goes, no, it does not block the chance to crits. I'm pretty sure it was just RNG being RNG in whatever situation it originally came up in. I'm not sure why this was considered confirmed exactly, but I was able to regularly crit using just crit cards. Whether it was 1 card, 2 card, 3 card, 4 cards, she was still able to crit just fine. Additionally, it had no effect, obviously, on a guaranteed crit move, so it appears to be debunked as far as I'm concerned. However, that being said, I can confirm that this time around, throwing rocks do not appear to have any chance to full crit whatsoever. So you got natural crits and full crits. Full crits are basically your double damage. However, it appears if it's going past a certain value, like I think if you hit above 1,000, maybe it goes down to like 60% of potential maximum or something like that. It appears to be that after you start getting into 4 digits that it's suddenly getting a bit of a dropped off effect. This is why something like, I know a video doesn't go by that I don't mention them, but you know, the whole 5 damage stack archer thing is kind of a big deal there, because you can essentially do a full double crit. Either known ways, though. As far as all this is concerned, no, it appears that it does appear that yeah, the curse doesn't have any effect on that. It doesn't. Throwing rocks are unable to crit under any circumstances except for natural crits, sometimes doing that extra 10 damage, which is going to be a bit of a lifesaver when we do the no skills, no equipment run. What else? There was, dang it, there was something else here, and I'm trying to remember. I don't remember. Okay. So that is about that then. So yeah, as far as curse interactions, really it's just doing a combination of everything from curse 1 to 3, or rather it really is just curse 3 and then an AoE curse 3 from PSP there. The whole no counters thing is actually something that it did in PSP as well. However, Stun did it as well in that version. That's just taken out in this one. That's all there really is to that one. Let's see. Any other potential interactions? I don't think so at this second. So, let me know what other kind of stuff you want to see tested, and hopefully we can kind of science this whole thing out. Oh, in terms of debuff odds landing, I don't think luck had any play in that one as well. That's what the other thing was. So I did test this with debuff odds. They seem to land at roughly the same rate, so the only thing that seems to affect it is 100% hit chance moves. Which, honestly, why would you be using True Strike anyway? You got Vigorous right over here on this guy, except he's too low level for it, so he doesn't. I'm sure somebody else does. Do you? You look like somebody that would. There we go. He's probably got Vigorous, right? Does he? There we go. Just use that. Just use Vigorous or Eagle, and there you go. Forget the whole True Strike thing. Alright. So that kind of just... I mean, basically what I want to find next is if there's any actual use for something like True Strike or True Flight or whatever else, kind of outside very niche challenge run scenarios. I'd assume no. I mean, you do drop off pretty quickly if you let yourself get behind. That being said, it's really not the end of the world. I mean, you can really play around almost anything in this game if you know how to counter things right. Alright, anyway, so that'll be that for today's test. Let me know, again, what you'd like to see tested, if you have any other weird crackpot theories or whatever else, and, yeah, y'all have a good one. Take care. So I'm just throwing this out there somewhere just on the off chance that you didn't know about this, but, in terms of left-handed gear, it's not that it doesn't affect your stats. It's more that it doesn't directly affect your offense and defense values. I believe it may potentially work for the purposes of increasing debuffs, but I can confirm that in terms of health, luck, and MP, it definitely adds its bonus, as well as potentially some other things under some circumstances. But for example, right here, this is his daily luck with the Assassin Blade on, and if he were to go ahead and take it off, then you'll see that his luck ends up changing to something as soon as I get back to that icon, and there you go. So you can see that the luck value is one of those things that's affected. I believe that, again, the way that this is working is just it will add the stats for the purposes of other checks and defenses and things like that, but it won't necessarily actually add to the offensive value of the other weapon. So, like, for example, having a vitality or dexterity or whatever, like strength or dexterity bonus on the left hand will not improve the right hand weapon, but it would, in theory, improve your defenses for the purpose of getting attacked. That is to say, if it's a separate check from your hard defense. I know that's a weird way to put it, but, like, say for the purposes of something attacking you in some way that it checked you in a non-standard way. So, like, for example, right here, you can see that his actual physical defense, despite that 5 vitality, isn't going up, but if there is anything that separately checks this skill, again, aside from the defense value for the purpose of the calculation, it would seemingly go up. So for the purposes of mind, I believe that it should theoretically boost their debuff rate. For the purposes of avoidance, it's kind of its own thing, so presumably that gets boosted. For the purposes of Vit and Dex, I would assume it would increase your accuracy, but not your damage. But again, in terms of what exactly affects what, this isn't a, like, I've seen this reported as a quote-unquote bug in Reborn. This isn't a bug. This is a weird quirk of the way that the PSP system did things, and again, this is built off that same engine. it's just a quirk of the engine. So anyway, just kind of figured I'd throw this out in the middle and moving on. Okay, I just remembered what I forgot. So in terms of the whole right-hand weapon decides resistance thing, I wanted to specifically cover this because it's not exactly as out of the blue as it originally seems. Now, it's not exactly ideal. I wish they would actually mention something about this. But in terms of defense tailoring, this is one of those cases where it feels like in many cases when they were going and making this game, they were kind of like randomizing a bunch of things around in different directions. It's almost like they took the PSP version and threw it in a blender, and some mechanics just landed in entirely different places. But in this particular case, like when it comes to these resistances, or not necessarily resistances, but specifically the whole, like, if you use a slashing weapon, you use the slash resistance on your armor kind of deal. Back in the PSP version, you could effectively do this with your weapon skills, namely that you would use, like, for example, you equipped something like this right here. You thought you were running into enemy, like, one-handed swords or whatever else. You would, pop this on here, and it's like, oh, you have extra armor because you understand those weapons better. So granted, yes, I understand that it's misleading in terms of, like, well, then why don't they just say that you're doing that, or why don't they highlight the icon, or who knows, whatever else. I don't know exactly why they decided to go about it this way, but functionally speaking, on a mechanical level in terms of what you prefer for endgame, this feels to me like the way that I've been using it in challenge runs, the way that I've seen it potentially utilized here, for being able to be like, well, I'm specifically having an issue with that guy over there, maybe they're, maybe I need additional physical resistance. It's not ideal, but it basically does create a situation where there's kind of an intentional mismatch between your gear and between your armor and your weapon. Now, to clarify one misconception that I've seen come up from last time, this doesn't mean that, like, you're using slashing resistance, that means you only resist slash. This is basically meaning you're using a slashing weapon, your physical resistance is now whatever the slashing number is over here. So suddenly it's like 3, 18, 31, 33 here, so suddenly it would be 33 just across the board physical resistance, whereas if we switched over to a crushing weapon in the right hand, it would be like 9, 11. So suddenly their physical resistance rating would go down to 11%. Again, it's one of those cases where if they had highlighted it better UI or whatever else wise, then this would be kind of a cool way of doing it, because again, incongruent mismatches and things like that are pretty fun to play around, but it would have been nice if it actually directly, said something about it. Now, that said, I'm not entirely convinced that this isn't a bug. This is, again, where we just do the usual game of is it a feature or is it a bug? Because in this particular case, it's very possible that they simply got the triggers in the reverse order or something. So for example, like, let's say it attacks and it checks for your weapon instead of enemy weapon or something like that. I don't know for sure. Again, we're several patches in, you would have assumed that would have gotten just quickly switched back to the right location at some point. But again, we know that there's some kind of corporate meddling. We don't know for sure. And if we're being completely honest, there's a lot of situations where a lot of stuff was potentially made to get newer folks into the series. So for example, when it comes to a lot of the resistance kind of stuff, picking the highest number instead of letting you stack it, it's reduced the amount of insanity, which is kind of... That's a theory that... I don't know, I keep going back and forth on that one. Because, like, on the one hand, yes, technically speaking, it would mean that people don't intentionally screw themselves by losing out on stacks so much. They also don't intentionally, or don't accidentally break the game by stacking things when they weren't aware that they were doing that. At the same time, I'm not really sure about the whole theory of whether or not they tried to make things more quote-unquote casualified, because so far this has been overall probably the hardest entry in the series. Like, bar none. Like, a lot of us have been used to years of playing One Vision, so we have, a pretty good familiarity with a lot of the kind of the inner mechanics and more difficult parts, or more difficult balance, but, like, go back to vanilla sometime and you'll see how easily breakable that system was. especially the Japanese version. If you've never tried the Japanese version, it is a wild ride where basically you can friggin' squish something with a Caldia no trouble. In fact, I'm not sure many folks realize how blatantly overpowered stuff like the Iron Fan +1 was in that version. Actually, it's just the Iron Fan. It doesn't even get a +1 version. Somebody decided that it needed to specifically match like endgame one-handed warhammers for whatever reason, so you could just basically make you could quickly go out into Tynmouth at any point, pick yourself a Caldia, upgrade that thing, and there you go. You suddenly have a stun hammer that almost anything can use. That's got freakishly high penetration for when you get it in the game. There were a lot of little things like that all over the place. Either way, so as far as whether or not certain mechanics were done certain ways to make things easier, it's so hard to know at this point. I don't know. Like, yeah, the AI using debuffs might potentially have scared even more people off, but many of the new folks that got scared off, like, people either embraced the challenge and managed to get their way through the end of the game and enjoyed it, or immediately got terrified somewhere around chapter 2 or 3 and left. And especially you saw quite a few reviews out there that were simply saying things like, oh, you know, I just simply wasn't having a hard time because I had to grind and I couldn't grind anymore. There's no other possible way to beat an RPG but grinding. And, you know, I mean, they were gone from the get-go. I'm assuming that's probably the main thing that they wanted to address. But yeah, like, it is possible that from a design perspective, they simply thought that there were just too many debuffs for people to learn immediately, in which case, New Game Plus mode. I mean, they did mention that at some point they were working on a sort of New Game Plus mode that would allow you to toggle on a lot of the features of the PSP version. So maybe some data miners will find that. I don't know. I will say, thinking about the potential like One Vision Reborn kind of idea is generally one of those things that like makes you wish for having a Steam Deck. Anyway, so I gotta get back to the day though. That's all I had time for. Just kind of wanted to randomly muse about some of this stuff. Would love to hear what you guys think. And yes, I know for a lot of folks, you know, some of the changes bounced off. I get it. I know. We're just discussing at this point. So y'all have a good one. Take care, and see you soon.